Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Weor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of many available by free download or podcast. The hundreds of hours of lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live. The live lecture is accompanied by an online chat, allowing listeners to read additional explanations related to the lecture and providing an opportunity to ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate or tune into our continuous web broadcast, visit our website for more information at gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. For more information or to make a donation, visit our website at gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy. In these studies of the Gnostic tradition, we seek to examine the practical utilization of all religious mythological symbols. In order for us to be able to harness the very purpose of those symbols and aid us in our own development towards the perfection of our human soul. In other words, Gnosis relies upon the study of myth and theory to empower practice. This is the entire purpose. We do not study religion or spirituality as a diversion or as entertainment, but instead because we tire of pain. We are weary of war. We are tired of being in darkness. The one who approaches the study of Gnosis, even if they call it something else, the one who seeks to experience religion, to know it from their own direct conscious experience, does so because in their own experience, in their own life, they have lived and known the first noble truth of the great Buddha Shakyamuni, that life is suffering. If someone has not yet verified this fact, then Gnosis will remain a closed door. Real experience of religion will remain impossible. And this is because in order to harness real Gnosis, you have to be ready to die to all your desires. Because the second noble truth is that suffering is caused by desire. And until you have reached this understanding, you will be not ready to die, to perish, to relinquish all your desires. if you still have this attachment and love, this indulgence in pleasure, then gnosis will remain a closed door. Because where pleasure abides, pain must also abide. And this is the nature of nature. This is the very function of material existence. A great pendulum that swings between craving and aversion, symbolized in the two pillars on the tree of life: mercy and severity, pleasure and pain. It's only when these two sides of Tob and Ra, good and evil, are understood, are experienced, are comprehended, that the tree of knowledge can yield its true fruit. Thus, in order for us to reach that experience, we have a physical body. We inhabit this third-dimensional level of nature, and we suffer. We suffer not because of a tyrant in heaven or because of the burdensome rules imposed upon us from above. We suffer because we have desire, because we have lust, and we have anger, and we have pride. This is why we suffer. When our mind becomes freed, when our heart is freed from fear and from envy and from jealousy and resentment and all of the multitude of defects that corrupt the temple of our heart, suffering ceases. And this is why the third noble truth says, and there is a way out of suffering. That way is the fourth truth, which is cessation of desire. The eightfold path, which one walks in any true religion, by any name. This is what we seek, to step upon that path, which is not in the physical world, it is in the heart. It is in the mind. That path is a path that calls for urgent action, psychological action, spiritual action, which may not be visible physically. It doesn't mean that we modify our physical behaviors, like how we dress or talk or act, although in some cases we do need to change those things. The main change is psychological. And this is in order to alter the vibration of our mind. We suffer because our mind is very heavy with desire, with memories, with anger and pride and resentment. And as such, burdened with these very heavy elements, the mind sinks into the depths. All of nature is a great expanse of vibrating matter and energy. And everything vibrates according to its psychological level. This humanity vibrates with a very dense, low level. And we see that this intense vibration is increasing from day to day. It is becoming heavier. Life is becoming more complicated, more difficult, more uncertain. As many as the bright ideas are that we have, all the optimism that we want to cultivate, the bright future we hoped for, the facts are impossible to deny. Our world is sinking. A simple review of the experience of our life and the experience of our parents and our grandparents and their parents can demonstrate how much more complicated life has become, how much more burdened with difficulties, responsibilities, uncertainties, pain. And we see that the pace is increasing, and that the effects of all of our actions are beginning to amplify and become overwhelming. And this is why when we survey the expanse of our planet, we cannot comprehend the extent and depth of our problems. It's impossible for our mind to picture the entire scenario, the entire range of potential threats and dangers that are growing day after day. From the changing climate to the proliferation of pollution, radioactive materials in our water and our soil, the threat of war, which could spark anywhere at any time and overwhelm us, the proliferation of lust, the decay of the family, the collapse of our criminal system, of our education system, of our political system. In every level, in every aspect of life, we do not see a golden age. We do not see a civilization who rides into the light of the sun, gloriously reflecting the beauty of the divine. Instead, we see a civilization that mocks God, that scoffs at virtue, that ridicules the pure, that crucifies the prophets. This is our world. This is why we need these studies. It is not merely to entertain ourselves or be distracted from our problems. It is to solve them. Our world exists as it does because of how we exist as individuals. Our world trembles in pain because we as individuals tremble in pain, in darkness, with supreme anxiety and loneliness and spiritual emptiness, longing to know God, but not even knowing the language of God, longing to know how to solve our problems, even petty ones, but not knowing how to communicate with the divinity that is within us. Kabbalah is the language of God. It is the language of the internal worlds. It is the method by which all of the Buddhas, the avatars, the messengers, speak the word. The word, or the logos, is that supreme expression of the light, which is a form of knowledge that is so beyond the intellect. It is as if we compare an atom of dust with a galaxy. And this is why when we approach these studies of Kabbalah or Gnosis or Da'at, we become overwhelmed. Because we try to comprehend a galaxy with the mind of an ant. And we are an ant in the speck of the infinite, a speck of dust in the infinite. The potential to comprehend nature, enlightenment, the divine, exist within us because we have the consciousness, the essence, the human soul, which is a particle of that expanse, a particle of the divine. Within us we have an element which is connected with God. But unfortunately, that element sleeps, and most of us are not even aware of it. In this tradition, we call it the consciousness. It can also be called the essence. In Sanskrit or Buddhist terms, it is called Tathagatagarbha, which means the embryo of the Buddha, or the Buddhatadhatu, the nature of the Buddha nature. These terms all refer to a seed, a germ in the ancient term. Like the seed of a great tree, it is an element which, if it is cared for and fed, can grow to become a Buddha, an angel, a fully developed human being. The seed of the consciousness, or the seed of the soul, resides within each human being. But it is just an embryo. It needs to be grown and cared for. And this is why we have received the many religions and mystical teachings that have been given to humanity. All religions have as their fundamental purpose the nurturing and development of that seed. In Hebrew terms, that seed is symbolized in the letter Nun, which is where we get the word Noah. And the story of Noah and his famous ship represents the beginning of this process of the development of that seed. And that process is symbolized throughout all the stories of the Bible. From Noah through his children, through Joseph, and to Moses, and beyond. Each of those prophets represents a stage of development, symbolically, of the development of the essence, until it becomes a fully fledged human being, a soul. This is represented by Moses. Moses is that soul who has reached nirvana, become a full human being. His name properly is Moshe, which is spelled Mem, Shin, He. And those letters encode the meaning of his name. It means born of water and spirit. If you've studied Christianity, you know that Jesus told Nicodemus, you must be born again of water and spirit. You must become Moses, Moshe. In other words, you must be born as a human soul. And this is why Jesus said, with patience ye shall possess thy soul. He never said that we had a soul. So there are many things in our religion, whether Christian or Jew, Buddhist or Hindu, Muslim, Zoroastrian, within which we need to delve, to go deeper than the literal, superficial meaning. All the stories in all of the scriptures are symbolic and provide teachings to us about how to develop our soul. That teaching is not easy. To accomplish the development of the human soul is to fulfill the greatest work in the universe. This is not something that comes easily or comes overnight. Many people like to comfort themselves with the idea that they can simply believe in a religion or do a 10 or 15-minute practice every day and they will be saved. And if you've not heard it before, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, because I know it's painful. But that is not true. The development of the human soul requires every atom of your being. Every atom. Every single bit of your matter and energy has to be directed towards that. This is how difficult it is. This is how challenging. Why? Because the end result is a God, an angel, a Buddha. Such a thing does not happen automatically, overnight, or mechanically. In the same way that a planet does not arise spontaneously overnight. A sun, a solar system, a galaxy. These things correspond psychologically to the level of angels, Buddhas, prophets. These are huge cosmic events which occur over great expanses of time and with enormous expenditures of energy. Likewise, to develop the human soul requires enormous energy. When a seed physically bursts itself to become a tree, the seed dies, right? The seed passes away, and that new life emerges within it. But for that seed to become a sprout, and for that sprout to become a huge tree, requires a huge amount of energy and matter in nature. Our soul is the same. The emergence of the soul within us requires that the shell die. That shell is our personality. It is our name. It is our history. It is our belief, our theories, our ideas, everything that we think of as ourselves, because we are merely a seed. And this death is symbolized in the story of Noah and the ark. Noah, Nun, the seed, enters the ark. But you should know that in the Bible, in Hebrew, the word ark is not there. The word ark we explained in a previous lecture. That ship represents something. The boat of Osiris. A vessel. What it represents is an aron. Aleph, Resh, Vav, Nun in Hebrew. And when you look into the Bible to find the word ark, you'll either find ship or aron. Aron means a vessel, a container. Properly it is Aron Kodesh, which means the holy vessel. Something that contains. But it can be translated also as coffin. Aron means coffin. And you just discover when you look into the book of Genesis that the very last line of Genesis, the very last sentence says, Joseph died and was placed in an ark in Egypt. The Aron. Joseph, who represents the lineage from Noah, is the development of that seed of our soul, who must die. The essence is placed into that coffin so that that essence may be saved. All that is impure must die, just as when Noah entered the ark, all of the degenerated beings were punished by the great flood. The only surviving elements were the pure ones. The same thing happens with our soul. That story represents the development of our soul. When Joseph enters the ark, It represents an additional degree, a later degree of the development of the soul. And when that end comes in Genesis, that last moment, the next chapter is Exodus, which is when Moses comes. But Moses arrives because Israel is trapped in suffering. The name Israel, Ishrael, doesn't refer to an ancient nation. It refers to all the parts of our being, the consciousness, our divinity, who has become trapped in Mitzarim. The English Bibles say Egypt, but in Hebrew it says Mitzarim, the place between the waters. Hell. We are trapped in suffering, in slavery. The parts of God that we have within are in Mitzarim, enslaved by a tyrant who is the ego. Our ego, our desire, who wants to feed itself, to build itself, to become big and rich and fat. And we allow it. Because we allow ourselves to have pride and anger and lust and envy and jealousy and all of those defects that we live within. Moses represents an additional degree of development of that essence. Moshe. In each of these cases, Noah, Joseph, Moses, Moshe, they represent the human soul, which on the tree of life is related with Tiferet, which is in the very center of the tree of life. Whether you look at it vertically or horizontally, it's the middle. This image of the tree of life represents us. It also represents nature, the universe, how nature is constructed and how it functions. But for us, the main thing we need to know is that it represents us, our very structure, who we are. In order for us to come out of suffering, to develop Moshe within, who can lead all the parts of God through the wilderness, out of Egypt, and to the promised land, we need to know how to build the ark. Because you realize, if you've studied these stories, that Moses is given the instructions to build the ark, the Aron. And he has to do it in order to save the nation of God. These stories represent a work that we have to perform, spiritually and psychologically in ourselves. We're really not interested in the past, in terms of whether Moses was a real guy or not. It is completely irrelevant. We need to deal with facts, the reality that we face day to day. This must change. Our day-to-day facts, our existence. And in order for us to understand how to build the ark, we need to know the science, the language. We need to be able to receive the commands, the instructions of how to do it. Those instructions are called Kabbalah in the Hebrew language. In Sanskrit, they are called Dharma, which means the law, the truth, the way. The fourth truth is the Eightfold Path, the Dharma. It is the instructions to build the ark. When you really enter into the full practice of Kabbalah or the Eightfold Path or Dharma, whatever you call it, Your true purpose is to develop the capacity to receive instructions. Not merely to imitate others. Not merely to follow mechanically certain rules or behaviors. But to develop oneself. To stand on one's own feet. To look inside and see the light of God for oneself. And to know from experience. Gnosis means that. And the word Kabbalah comes from kabel, which means to receive. It does not mean to memorize. It does not mean to intellectualize. It means to receive. This is something that comes from outside in. By outside, I mean outside of the mind that we have now. It does not mean that we should stuff the mind with theories and books and ideas. It means we should open the mind so that God can speak. If you read the book of Exodus, the Most Holy explains to Moshe, to God, that he will give guidance to the people of Israel through the ark. And then he gives the instructions how to build it. And they're very precise. And we explained them in the previous lecture. So, those instructions of how to build the ark are the first step. And then once we've built it, we can receive divine guidance personally for ourselves. That guidance is not intellectual. It is intuitive. The language of God, the language of the internal worlds, the language of Kabbalah is intuitive. It is not intellectual. We can compare this to how we learn a language. As I'm speaking to you now, especially if you're a native English speaker, you don't think about the words that I'm saying, you hear the meaning. Once you've learned Kabbalah, Scripture will be the same to you. You will no longer have to analyze the words or try to memorize the meanings of things. The meaning will be clear, immediate, because you speak the language. Kabbalah is the same. So when we in these lectures present to you all the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, or talk about the 22 Hebrew letters, and it seems so difficult and so complicated, and you might say it's too intellectual, you need to stop right there and remember that when you were trying to learn your native language, it was not easy. It took time. You had to grow and develop patiently and learn each of the letters of your language with patience until the day arrived when, without realizing it, you no longer had to think about the letters or the words or what's a verb and a noun and a pronoun. It all just flows together naturally. And Kabbalah is the same. Little by little, you will suddenly come to a place where you no longer have to think about what does Tiferet mean? What does Da'at mean? Because you will know. What I'm trying to express to you is that Kabbalah is not intellectual unless we make it so. But to learn Kabbalah, we need to memorize it in the same way that we memorized our language. That we memorized how to speak and express ourselves. We need to memorize Kabbalah. We need to memorize these 10 spheres. And we need to memorize the 22 Hebrew letters because they are a language. And that language is the language of God. We can be a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian. It doesn't matter. These archetypes apply. When you study and memorize and learn and become very familiar When you dive deep into these archetypes, you can immediately comprehend the significance of any religious story. Because every religion comes from the one light. Every myth comes from the same source. Thus, this science explains them. And that's why in this tradition we talk about Shiva and Buddha and Krishna and Quetzalcoatl and Zeus and Odin, because they are all part of the same thing. Different names for the same thing. The tree of life is represented in this structure of 10 spheres, Sephiroth. And to us it may look strange or complex. But as you become familiar with it, it will become to you a most beautiful, powerful tool. This structure truly encodes and reveals a kind of wisdom that is so far beyond the intellect that the intellect will never grasp it. It cannot. But intuition can. And in order for you to reach that, you train your intellect first to understand the basic concepts, and then you let the intellect get out of the way. So the intellect can be the vessel it's intended to be. A tool, but not the only one. And from that, you start to penetrate the deeper meanings encoded in this structure. The tree of life has many levels of application, not just one. When we look at this structure of 10 spheres, we're seeing an archetypal model which represents every level of existence. Every level. And this tool can be applied in numerous ways. Most immediately, most importantly, it represents us. The tree of life represents any man or woman. Who we are. We can apply it to ourselves physically. If you superimpose this diagram over your body, the very top of it is called keter in Hebrew, which means crown, and it relates to the crown of your head. And all the other spheres correspond to different parts of the body, all the way down to the bottommost, called Malkut, which relates to your feet, physically speaking. But psychologically, spiritually, this tool also reveals the nature of who we are. If we start at the bottom, psychologically, Malkut represents the physical body itself. And as you move upwards along this structure, you find all of our psychological aspects are diagrammed perfectly. Immediately above Malkut, we see Yasod, which means foundation. This represents the vital energy of the body. The body physically is matter. Yasod is its energy. The two are codependent. You cannot have one without the other. In that sense, they are one. They depend upon each other. You cannot separate them. Yasod and Malkut. The next sphere upwards would be Hod, which relates to our emotions, the emotional body, which some call the astral body. The next would be Netzach, which relates to our mind, the process of cognition. The next would be Tiferet, which relates with our heart, with our consciousness, with our will. The next, Geburah, the divine consciousness, that which is within our human consciousness. And above this, Chesed, the Spirit, our inner Father, the Son of God. And the three at the top are the supernal triangle, the three in one, the Trinity, the Logos. These are aspects that are beyond spirit, and so are very difficult for us to understand. But conceptually, we can say that the first one here, the lowest of those three, Binah, means understanding or intelligence. The next one, Chokmah, means wisdom. And the top is Keter, the crown. These three in one are the being of our being, the God of our God. So you can see as we go upwards from our physical body, things become more rarefied, more subtle, more difficult for the intellect. But if you're intuitive in your understanding, you can grasp it. This has so much importance, this structure. It provides the key with which we can understand the meaning of our dreams, which most of us have that longing to know what our dreams mean. Or if we've had a vision in meditation or in some other way. Those visions, those dreams, are a symbolic language that the intellect cannot penetrate, but that we sense a meaning. We know there's something there, and often we feel pain because we know there's a meaning, but we cannot grasp it. And that's because our essence is weak. Our consciousness is weak. Our own Buddha nature is not developed and educated. As we study this science and learn and teach our consciousness, develop ourselves, little by little we start to have the tools in hand to comprehend that language in the same way as a young baby struggles to communicate and to comprehend its parent. And the parent struggles to express and communicate with the child. But gradually, the communication can be established as the child learns. You see, the child has to learn, not the parent. The child. We are that child. Our God, our inner God, speaks the language, but we don't listen. We don't understand. We're trying to do everything with our intellect or with beliefs, with theories, not trying to reach out and listen to the language of God. Some students say, why won't God just speak English to me? This is like expecting us to speak the language of an ant. Right? What God needs to express cannot be conveyed in our words. And you'll know the truth of that. When you've had a dream or a vision, it can be very brief. It can be in a flash. But it will contain so much knowledge, so much information, that your intellect will be astonished. Your whole being will be shocked at how much knowledge can be in one symbol. Our language cannot convey it. And speaking from my experience, it's similar to teaching lectures. To try to express in words what one grasps intuitively is incredibly difficult, because the words cannot convey the full range of the meaning. The only way you can really understand what these lectures are about is if you yourself dive into the content intuitively. Listening to the lectures is a good start. but you cannot understand it if you only listen superficially and walk away. You have to take the clues and actualize them, to use them, to dive into them. To do that, you have to first train your intellect a little, study a little, learn the different symbols so that your intellect is prepared. But then you have to dive into those symbols and meanings and abandon your intellect and open your mind to see new things. This is how God will teach you. And God is waiting to teach you. And that's why you're listening to these lectures. Someone inside of you is pushing you to it. This tree of life is the ark. It is the Aron. It is a coffin. It is a holy, sacred vessel, a container, whose mysteries and whose complexities will take you lifetimes to grasp. You will not get it in this life. Not completely. It takes lifetimes. That's how deep it is. That's how sacred it is. When God explains to Moshe to build his ark, he gives very specific instructions. And the interesting thing is that this ark has 6 sides. 6 angles or aspects, right? 4 on the sides, 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom. Like a box, like a coffin. When you study Kabbalah, you realize that those 6 are between Chesed and Yasod. The bulk of the tree, the middle of the tree. And this is because that is us. When we look at the tree psychologically or spiritually, we are psychologically a mind who longs for yoga, union, religare, religion, to unite with God. Remember, God told Moses, when you build the ark, I will come and hover above the ark to speak with the nation and give their instruction. God, in this case, is the upper 3 spheres, the Logos, the 3 in 1, the Trinity, the Aleph, the breath, who hovers above the remaining spheres on the tree, the Aron, the coffin, within which we must die. You see, all of us have a physical body, which symbolizes the ark, the Aron. The physical body is a symbol, and we need the physical body to do this work. We need it. But the physical body is Malkut, which is at the bottom. It is not developed. We need our Moshe, our own Moses, our human soul, to be developed in order to create the full ark, which is the soul. These spheres above. Hesed, Geburah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yasod. But the way that this is accomplished is by making Yasod and Malkut one. By uniting these elements. By making them one. And when you understand the significance of that sexually, spiritually, psychologically, the whole tree of life looks different. it's revealed to be something else entirely. You see, this ark, this Aron, physically, we have a representation of it. But remember what Jesus told the Pharisees? That we are like whitened sepulchres. It's a hard word to say. Whitened tombs. We do everything we can to clean the outside of ourselves so that we look pure and clean and nice and pleasant. But inside, we are full of filth and garbage. Inside of ourselves, we are full of decay, sickness, psychological sickness, which we can call by many names. Lust is the main one. In our minds, we hide away an enormous quantity of lust. And we surround it with anger and pride and envy and justifications and shame and fear. We are a whitened tombstone. We are a coffin, but God is not inside of it. The Shekinah, the essence of God, has left. We need to purify that temple, the heart temple, which on the tree relates to Tiferet, the heart. And by that purification, psychological purification, sexual purification, little by little, we're doing what God explains to Moses. You must cover the ark with gold. Gold relates to the sun, the Christ, Apollo. That light, that purity, Christ. When our ark, our mind, becomes pure, it becomes a fit vessel to receive the presence of God and thus the presence of that instruction. But this occurs in stages. It's a long process. It is a long work. It is very difficult. And that's why we have so many symbols, so many stories to explain this. This is why we need to study, and we also need to work. What's very curious, however, is that in the book of Exodus, or Shemot, when God gives all the elaborate instructions of how to build the ark, Moses doesn't build it. Did you realize that? All the instructions are given to Moshe, but he doesn't build it. Instead, God appoints someone else. In fact, two to build it. To understand that symbol requires that you have a very good intuitive grasp of the tree of life. But I will quickly guide you through it. But you may have to come back to this again because it's very, very deep. In the book of Exodus it says, the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, "See, I have called by name Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Ur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have imbued him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with talent for all manner of craftsmanship." And then he explains all the different elements that he would work with, the gold and silver and copper. And then it says, "And behold, with him I have placed Aholiab, the son of Ahasimach, of the tribe of Dan, and all the wise-hearted, unto whose hearts I have instilled wisdom, and they shall make everything I have commanded you." Those few sentences hide volumes of knowledge. But you cannot grasp it unless you know Kabbalah. But when you study Kabbalah, and you know the letters, and you know the tree of life, the meaning here is beautiful. So briefly, I'll give you one level of it. That it's not the whole thing. It's one piece. The first sentence says, "See, I have called by name Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Ur, of the tribe of Judah." So this is one of the two men that God appoints to build the ark for Moshe. But to understand this, you have to understand who Moses is, who Moses represents. And to understand that, you need to know the tree of life. As I mentioned, Moses, or Moshe, is related with Tiferet, the human soul, which relates with our willpower, our human consciousness. In other words, the essence developed, established in nirvana, established in the first degree. This is a soul who has created the solar bodies. This is a prophet. But it's part of us that we can attain to, we can reach. It's only the first stage of the work. Even that requires many years of work and a great deal of change in one's life. So Moshe represents the consciousness that has awakened and reached the fifth degree, or the fifth initiation of fire, the fifth major mystery. This is the soul who has entered the direct path, the path of the Bodhisattva. We're not talking about a Pratyeka Buddha or a Nirvani or any common saint. This is a soul that's going beyond mere sainthood. So this is a level of development that is uncommon. It can be done, but only with great change. And this is represented in his life. Moshe suffered a lot and was a revolutionary. And he represents that path of the revolution, spiritual revolution. So this man that God names Betzalel is said to be the son of Uri and the son of Ur. So many read this and think it's literal. Like those were literally his parents' names. But when you know Hebrew and you look at the letters, there's a lot of meaning there. These names actually mean light and whiteness. Ur, Aur, is light. And Uri comes from the word for white, pure, clean. The tribe of Judah is the tribe of the lion, Christ. But furthermore, it's said that his name, Betzalel, means in the shadow of El. El, E-L, is Hebrew for God. So who is in the shadow of El? That alone, that one thing, could be multiple lectures. El in Kabbalah is a name for Chesed. So Betzalel represents an aspect of our being, of our soul, related with the monad, with this triangle on the tree of life. But Betzalel specifically relates to the right-hand side, Chesed, mercy, love. The second man relates with the left-hand side, with Geburah. And we know this is true because he comes from the tribe of Dan, which is the tribe of judgment, severity, which is Geburah. So here we see the Trinity of the monad. Moses, Moshe, and these two men. It takes the three of them to create the ark. In other words, these two men are part of Moses. They are a part of him. And this is all explained in the Zohar, in the Kabbalah. What this means to us is that for the ark to be constructed and for the prophecy to be fulfilled, we need to reach first the level of being a Moshe. To reach the development of the ark in this level. That's a lot of work. That is a long process of development. But what's significant in the second sentence here is that God says, "And I have imbued him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with intelligence, with knowledge." The Spirit of God is the Ruach Elohim. The Ruach Elohim is that Spirit of God that hovered over the waters of Genesis in order to initiate creation. And the Ruach Elohim is related with the heights of our innermost. That Spirit who works in alchemy in order to create the soul. So Betzalel is a representation of that. And also, he was imbued with wisdom. And I told you that wisdom in Hebrew is chokmah. And he was imbued with intelligence. And intelligence in Hebrew is binah. Right? And he was imbued with knowledge. Knowledge in Hebrew is da'at. Da'at is a hidden sphere, which is between binah and hesed. In other words, between the top triangle and the rest of the tree. At this juncture between the Aron and the Logos is Da'at. Are you lost? It's very deep. Betzalel harnesses all these forces of the Ruach Elohim, represented in this upper trinity, but active through Da'at, knowledge. Da'at is the hidden knowledge, the secret knowledge that has never been given to humanity until the last 50 years. It was never public in this era. What we are teaching you is the knowledge of Da'at. It is the full revelation of all the mysteries. The reason is there is no more time. Our time is up. We have made such a mess of ourselves, such a mess of our mind. We have corrupted our own ark to such a degree that the divine has said that it is time once again for a great flood. So the ark, the instructions for the ark are being given openly. For anyone who wants to develop their own Noah, to enter into their own ark, to develop their own Moses, who will create their own ark, who will be saved. But to be saved, one must die. All that is impure in that ark must die. This can happen if we take advantage of the elements that we do have already. We have the seed, the beginning, the first elements that are needed in order for us to develop the soul. We have a physical body. We have some knowledge. We have a longing to know the truth for ourselves. In other words, all of these things point to our own innermost pushing us to do it. in the same way he pushed Noah and he pushed Moses. If we're serious, if we are willing to renounce our own false sense of self, the fake personality that we've clung to for so long, if we're willing to purify our mind of all of the garbage that we've been hoarding for lifetimes, we can make of our ark something beautiful and pure. But to do that, we need the knowledge and we need sincerity. The key here in this little story that I barely unfolded for you, Bezalel is able to accomplish the construction of the ark because he knew the secret of the letters. This is stated explicitly in the Zohar, in that ancient Kabbalistic text. Bezalel, who is part of the monad, who is part of Moshe, part of our inner being, is that part who intuitively can do it. But we have to train ourselves to reach that level. Bezalel, that aspect of our being, can receive the wisdom, the intelligence, the knowledge from the Logos if we use our human soul, Moshe, and follow the instructions that we are given inside. Not the instructions that I'm giving you or that any book gives you, but the instructions that you receive when you take off your shoes and you bow at the feet of your own burning bush, your own burning tree of life. To bow humbly before your own innermost, he who says, Eheye Asher Eheye, because he is what he is. And he is the only one who can teach your soul what you must do. The path is singular. As Jesus explained, there is one door, and it is narrow, and it is very difficult to reach. But that door is your own. It is not like anyone else's. It is your own because you have your own karma. You have your own problems. You have your own being, your own innermost, who will instruct you according to your needs. And this is why in this tradition we repeat that you should not follow anyone but the one who says, I am. Eheye is I am. Eheye Asher Eheye. He is the one that he is. This is our innermost. To follow that requires that we humble ourselves at that burning tree. But for that, we have to illuminate the tree. Our own tree is dark. When we close our eyes, we meditate, we pray, we see darkness. When we listen for the voice of God, we hear nothing. When we long for an answer of what we should do, we wait, and we don't hear anything but the doorbell. The fire that illuminates that tree is hidden inside of the tree. When you strike a match, when you light a fire, where does the fire come from? It's a mystery, isn't it? Where does the fire come from?
There are a lot of theories, but who really knows? All we know is we strike the match and the flame emerges. Right? But that can only happen if all of the conditions are proper. And then that magic occurs. The flame erupts. The creation of those conditions are given to us in what we call the second law. In Buddhist terms, they call it the Vinaya. And these are guidelines for behavior that create conditions within which that flame can erupt. Those guidelines include to stop killing, to stop lying, to stop taking intoxicants, to stop fornicating, to stop wasting energy, to not commit adultery, to not steal. Many things, because with our behaviors as we are now, we are soaking the match in all kinds of filthy things that prevent the flame from emerging. The match of our soul has to be clean, has to be with access to air, the breath of God, in order for that flame to erupt. That flame we call Kundalini. We call Shin. We call the Pentecost, or the Advent. It is the emergence of the very intelligence of God. You see, these three spheres at the top of the tree can be symbolized by the character Shin in Hebrew, which represents a flame. And that flame can burst forth from us, who are the seed of the tree that must be inflamed. But if our Aron, our ark, is submerged in the waters of Klipot, in those dark, dense waters of the great flood, no flame can emerge. We have to be floating on the waters, like the Ruach Elohim, in the ark, our ark. Then that flame can emerge, and illumination comes, and the guidance of God, and communion with the Shekinah, that intelligence, the Divine Mother, the Kundalini, the Pentecost. If we're serious about creating the ark, we start with revising our behavior. It doesn't matter if we believe in this or not. If we create the conditions, if we produce the causes, the effects will emerge. It's inevitable. You don't have to believe that the flame will come out of the match, but if you strike it, the flame will emerge. And the same is true of the soul. It is not a matter of belief or disbelief, accepting or rejecting. It is action. And as Samael Aun Weor said so perfectly, Gnosis arrives through intuitive action. Not intellect, not belief. To aid us in that process, we will now begin a course of lectures within which we will very slowly and carefully present and discuss and examine the Hebrew letters, so that each one of us has the chance to learn these letters, to understand them, so that we can apply them. This way, as you learn them, you will be empowered to study the Scripture and to study your own experiences through dreams, and through visions, so that you can acquire the knowledge for yourself, so that you can rely on the one who is within you to guide you. This is the purpose of Gnosis. That way, when you read stories like the one I was reading from the Bible, or you read any scripture, you will have the beginnings of the understanding of the arcana, the mysteries, the hidden knowledge, which is called Da'at. This is why Samael Aun Weor said in one of his books, in the studies of Kabbalah, we have to constantly refer to the Hebrew letters. And unfortunately, most of us have not received that education because of varying causes. Now we can, and we need to. So that's what we'll do for the next period of lectures. Will be about each letter in consecutive order. That way, little by little, these stories that at first appear very cryptic will start to appear to you to be very simple. Because in reality, for the intuition, they are not complicated. They're beautiful. Similarly, if I were to describe a flower to you and only use intellectual terms, you wouldn't understand it. It wouldn't make any sense. Or if someone came to you and said, well, there's this thing that's a toenail and there's this thing that's an eyeball, but we don't know what it is. Because they don't see the whole body of the person. They're only seeing the little bits and pieces. You can't make sense out of it. You have to study the whole thing, the whole body of the work. And that body is encompassed in the Hebrew letters and in the 10 Sephiroth. If you study Gnosis without studying those pieces, the full picture, you're only picking up little things, not getting the entire body of the work. If you want to create the ark, you need the whole science. I think I should stop there. There's a lot more to this topic, but I can see everybody's falling asleep. I'm just kidding. Any questions?
So, when we learn the letters, does that mean we should go out and get a Bible written in Hebrew? Or?
It's a good idea. Having a Bible that's in the original Hebrew is a very good idea. You will see a lot that is not in the English. As an example, most of us who grew up in English-speaking countries have heard about these arks. The Ark of Noah and the Ark of Moses. There's not just 2 arks in the Bible. There's 4 or 5 or more. In fact, the word ark is not in the Bible in Hebrew or in Greek. It's not. It's only in Latin and English. So when you look into the Hebrew, you can learn things that are not in what we collectively think is our religion. There are many things hidden there. In these lectures, we barely scratch the surface because we know it's difficult to understand. So when you do it on your own, you start looking into those letters, you will see there is enormous knowledge, beautiful knowledge. And this is true of any religion, any scripture. The same is true of Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, the Mayan language. All of them encode enormous intelligence and wisdom.
How can we better teach and encourage students to study Kabbalah, even though they feel frustrated and say that it is either too complicated, impractical, or beyond their level?
Yeah, it is difficult for students to understand Kabbalah, and it's difficult to teach. But as I explained, when we were children, school was difficult. There are things in our education that were very hard for us. I don't mean things that we didn't really need. A lot of things we learned we didn't really need. But there are things in our development that are necessary, and Kabbalah is necessary. So if someone's an instructor trying to teach Gnosis, you have to find the idiosyncrasy of your own being and how your own being will teach it. You can see that each of one of us who teach here have a different way. We express a different way. We focus on different things because we follow our own idiosyncrasy, and every instructor has to do the same. Each of us has something to offer. Nonetheless, we cannot avoid teaching what must be taught. If we do that, we condemn the souls who need that teaching. If our innermost, our being, is guiding us to teach something or to study something, we must do it. Because he is God. And who are we to go against the guidance of God? This oftentimes places an instructor in an uncomfortable position. But we have to recall that this is true of everyone who follows the instructions of God. This is not easy. Noah was ridiculed. People try to kill the prophets symbolically in the religions. As an instructor, anyone who teaches will face the same thing. People will not love you for it. They won't, and don't expect it. You have to follow and teach what you are led and told to teach inside. And to do it with courage and sincerity. Was there another question?
Yeah. In addition to studying the Hebrew letters, how important is it to have the Zohar so you can also study the Bible?
The Zohar is also a beautiful thing to study. So I recommend studying the Zohar. You will get a lot from that. But be prepared to be confused. The Zohar is extremely layered. This is why we're going to focus on the Hebrew letters and on the 10 Sephiroth. Because these are the basic elements of the language. It's like learning the ABCs. We need to know the basic letters. And Samael stated that. He said the problem with the students is they don't even learn the letters. The first letters. It's the Hebrew letters. We don't even know that. We need to know that. Anyone who studies the doctrine of Samael Aun Weor needs to study the scriptures, the Bible, the Zohar, the Talmud, all the sutras, the tantras, right? The Popol Vuh, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata. There's an enormous number of scriptures that we need to know. And it's because all of them include knowledge and information that is Kabbalistic and that teaches us what we need to know. We can't disregard that. I would suggest that it's a waste of time to read commentaries about scriptures. We should read the scriptures. We should meditate. This is where the real knowledge is. When you read a commentary, you're only reading an interpretation, which will filter the ability of your being to communicate to you. The scriptures are more difficult for the intellect. But once you have the basic knowledge together, organized in your mind, you can reach the intuitive aspect, which is what we really need that. Is there another question back there?
Do you know a good version of the Zohar?
There are many versions of the Zohar. There are many versions of the Bible. The best versions will be in the original language, which of course is the hardest for us to study because we don't know Hebrew or we don't know Sanskrit. But you should try to find versions that, of course, you can afford or are free, but that stay as true as possible to the original or that show you the original. As an example, try to find a Bible that has the original language. You can get what's called an interlinear Bible, which shows you, or what do they call it? A polyglot. A polyglot, maybe. I don't remember the word. Which shows you word for word the different languages. And this helps you penetrate the real meaning. You can find many things that are not in the English. This is true of any scripture from any country. To look in the original language. Because most of the time, the translators do not know this knowledge. And so they interpret based on modern sensibilities, which have nothing to do with the hidden knowledge. When you read an interpretation or a translation, the vast majority of the real knowledge is gone. This is why we need to study Hebrew. And if you have the capacity to do it, study Chinese, study Tibetan, study Sanskrit. These will deepen your knowledge. Is there a question here too? Someone?
Yeah. You're talking about the filtering the scriptures. How about Dion, Fortune's mystical Kabbalah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that's a filter, how reliable is that book? Because I know there's even mistakes there.
Yeah, we can't expect that every book will be perfect. The book of Dion Fortune is a very good book. It has some issues, a few things. But this is going to be true of anything we study. Even the scriptures have been corrupted. Even the scriptures have mistakes. The Bible itself has passages that are black magic. Out and out black magic in the Bible. But unless you study that, you won't know it. So you need to study and analyze what you study. It's not just to take it and accept it as it is. You have to analyze. That's why I say you have to dive into it, meditate. Meditate, meditate. Listen to the guidance your God gives you intuitively and through visions. This is how you reach it. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, one of my instructors was pushing me to study Kabbalah. And I had a lot of resistance because it's complicated. One day I thought, I'm going to try and find something good to read. So I found this book that everybody said was a great book. All the reviews, all the recommendations, everybody says, oh, this is a great, it's the main one, you've got to read this one. So I went and I was looking at it, I looked at it in the bookstore, and I felt something wasn't right. So I put it back and I walked away. Later that day, I remembered that I had a dream. That two rabbis came to me with a beautiful book, full of Kabbalistic symbols, but intuitively I knew it was corrupt. So I walked away. But I didn't remember the dream when I was looking at the book in the bookstore. I only remembered later. And then I realized, oh, I'm so stupid. But at least I listened, to that little feeling, something's not right, so I put it away. So this is a thing that we all have to learn. I feel very lucky to have had that experience, because if I hadn't felt that and later remembered that, I might have picked up that book and learned things that were not right. And maybe have misled me. And it's true of anything. We have to listen inside. Is there a next question back here too?
Yeah. How important is the gematria of the Kabbalah, the mathematical aspects of it?
We're going to get into that. The gematria and the mathematics is the very science of it. Every Hebrew letter is also a number. So every name, every word has a numerical significance. Really, the Kabbalah is a science of numbers. But this kind of mathematics is not intellectual mathematics, it's intuitive. It's a kind of mathematics that doesn't mean we sit down and have to chart everything on paper. Sometimes it can be helpful to look at the meaning of a name, like, for example, the name Adam, which is Aleph, Dalet, Mem. That name numerically is the number 9 when you add the letters, which is a very significant meaning. And it's true of every name, Yeshua, Moshe, all the names. But you can't add up the English name. You need to add up the Hebrew name. And we'll get into that a little bit in the course that we're going to do. Is there another question?
The course online.
It is different. It will be different. It will be different. We did a course a couple of years ago about the 22 Arcana, in which we discussed the Hebrew letters in relation with the Tarot and the Kabbalah. And that was a very dense, deep, difficult course to follow. The one we are intending to do now will be simple. Well, as simple as it can be. Gnosis is not simple. But we're going to try to present something that will help us all grasp the basic structures so that we can go deeper.
Should we review like every week?
You should just meditate. I would suggest the only thing to do to prepare is meditate. You specifically. Another question?
Students who say that it is enough to have an intuition about Kabbalah in order to understand it, rather than acquiring direct experience.
This is an interesting question. The question is it enough to have an intuitive experience rather than have the intellectual study, right? Is that the question?
Yeah.
This would be comparable to you going to China and not speaking Chinese and trying to get around the country intuitively understanding what everybody's talking about. You might be able to get it sometimes, but I would say most of the time you're going to be confused. It's better for you to learn the language. Kabbalah is a language. It's given for a reason. It is divine. You see, the Kabbalah was given to humanity for a purpose. As I said in the beginning, it is not for entertainment. It is not for distraction. It is not just to intellectualize. It is a language. It is the language of the internal worlds. If you don't want to learn that language, it's up to you. But when you go to the internal worlds, you won't understand anything. You might have a little intuition here and there, but you won't get the meaning. The meaning is conveyed once you have the symbols organized in your mind, in the same way you learn a language, any language. Is there another question?
We were talking about that hidden suffera. That was...
That.
Yes, that's always, I guess, been known, but it's more publicly known in more modern times. So in a way, it's part of the language that we're just fully grasping. And now we finally have the language in which to address some of the concerns of our paradigm. Why is that so? And also, did previous incarnations of humans like Atlantis, did they have this knowledge as well? And is that the reason for its failure or destruction?
It's a big question. There's a lot there. The Da'at itself is a symbol in the tree of life. And Da'at represents the tree of knowledge. And if you recall in the book of Genesis, it's when the woman was tempted to eat of the tree of knowledge that we fell into suffering and all of our problems began. The symbol of Da'at is so deep and implies so many things. We've given many lectures about that, just that. But in synthesis, in general, it represents the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. So there are two potential outcomes from that knowledge. To walk the path of Tob, which is goodness, and goodness is chesed, mercy, the innermost. Or to walk the path of Ra, which means pollution or evilness. That knowledge leads to that. So for the past centuries, long time, that knowledge has been hidden. Precisely because we who are so impure would take that fruit and become more evil. Right? That knowledge has been protected for our own good. Not to punish us, and not to say that, like some people say, the mysteries have been hidden and this is a cruelty of the gods. It is not. It is done from compassion. It's the same as to say, if you have a bad child, would you give them a machine gun? No. That knowledge is extremely powerful. The knowledge that we explain in these lectures and in the books, gnosis or da'at, is a type of power. You can call it a weapon. And it is that. It is a sword that has two edges. And it can cut you, and it can kill you. Or it can kill your ego. This is why many who enter into the mysteries what we see as a result of that, most of the time, is a large number of demonic personalities. From most mystery schools in these times, we see that. That is the result. The people who emerge from that level of knowledge, that form of knowledge, are really demonic. They worship lust. They worship pride. They are idolaters of themselves. Rarely do we see a Moses, a Krishna. And that's why the knowledge was always protected in this dark age, for that reason, to prevent the creation of worse and worse demons. But now that this age is arriving the end, when this age must close, the seed for the next age must be extracted, and the knowledge is being given openly, so that any who wants to escape from suffering, to fulfill themselves completely, to attain the union with the divine, can do so. And those who don't do that will become worse. They will take this knowledge and become worse. And we see that. This is why it's been said that the Gnostics are the worst people on the face of the planet. And the one who said that was the head of the Gnostic movement. Because we get this knowledge and we make ourselves worse most of the time. Because we don't really seriously work on the ego. Instead, we take this knowledge and we become very proud, like we know something. We become full of ourselves, strutting around like peacocks, showing off our Gnostic feathers. And this is an abomination that is happening everywhere. The real science requires death, and through death is liberation. Through death is resurrection. Right? So you asked about Atlantis also. This happened then too. That's the story of Noah. It represents that. The story of Noah is a symbol of what happened in Atlantis. Exactly what's happening now, only now it's worse. Because the karma is heavier. Another question? Yes?
You mentioned archetypes. What exactly would that be?
An archetype is a diagram, like a blueprint. You've seen blueprints for when you're going to build a building, you first have a blueprint, right? You draw it. You make the structure. That's what an archetype is. So in the world of the archetypes, which relates with this upper triangle, are all the possibilities, all the potentials. And that's why from there we get the instructions for the arc. We get the blueprint, right? In the same way, all of these Sephiroth represent archetypes in us because they're not yet developed. They're just the drawings, the outlines, the possibilities are there. But until we become that, they are just archetypes. We study Moses, we study Jesus, who are archetypes within us. They represent something that can become, but is not yet.
So if you had a dream, that could be like a sneak peek into the blueprints of...
It's possible. Yeah, many times in our dreams we see archetypes. We're being taught about archetypes. So interpreting dreams is something that is deeply personal and must be intuitive. And oftentimes will take years. You know, the real meaning of a dream often doesn't reveal itself for many years. It takes a lot of patience. There are dreams that I had 10, 15, 20, even when I was a child, that only now I'm understanding. So for that, we have to just be patient and keep waiting and waiting for that understanding to emerge. And remember, the understanding is Binah, right? The Divine Mother. She's the one who provides that, but according to her own schedule. Is there another question? No? Okay, thank you.
The presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Help Gnostic Radio to help others. Make a donation by visiting gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the wide variety of resources available on our websites. Thank you for your support. May all beings be happy.